the fuck up. It's time to talk business. Jared Taylor, Matt Best, and Evan Hafer proudly present Blackhearted. Sponsored by Black Rifle Coffee Company and Arson Wave.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm back again.
Hello, JT.
Hello, Evan.
So we've got a special guest tonight. I guess I've known Mike for, how many years now, Mike? Can you hear us?
It's been 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years. We met doing some other things, and post transition, just kind of watching you grow your business. And I guess let me just launch in by saying, hey, Mike, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, what you did in the military, and then what you're doing now, and then I'll just kind of run with some questions.
That sounds good, man. So this is Mike Glover. I'm the CEO of Fieldcraft Survival, LLC, based in Durango, Colorado. So, I spent 18 years in the U.S. Army, 4 years in the infantry, and the remainder of my time in special operations. Transitioned into the National Guard, was a sergeant major in Special Operations Detachment Africa in Texas, the great state of Texas, and then did some government contracting work, and then transitioned into what now is my business, Fieldcraft Survival, which I've been doing for the last couple of years. Veteran entrepreneur.
So, a lot of this question always comes up, which is, have you always wanted to have your own business? When did you start thinking about it? And what were the steps that you were making while in the mill, if you were, to drive yourself to that portion?
Before I was in the military, I joined relatively young, like most guys. I was 17 years old. And, I sold blow pops and Jolly Ranchers when I was in high school. I don't know if that's entrepreneurship at its birth, but I grew up, I'm half Asian. So I grew up in a Korean entrepreneur family where everybody in my family owned businesses for some reason. That's a Korean thing. Right. But going into the military, honestly, I really didn't have any desire to run a business because my passion and commitment was to the Army. But as soon as I started getting to the tail end of my career, I started thinking about what I wanted to do. And honestly, it wasn't business. It was U.S. government. It was transitioning, like many special operations guy, into a staff position with the government. But I kind of was exposed to a lot of businessmen, including yourself, who were passionate about business and giving back. So that's something that I saw that I wanted to take part in, and started setting myself up on the tail end, which was my reserve National Guard time and my contract time. And, just like thousandaires, the Thousandaire Club and U.S. government contracting, you build the capital, some dudes blow it, and some dudes set themselves up for success in the future. So I was the latter. Right.
It's funny. I there's so many guys that come through the office, and a lot of them from our previous profession. And they're kind of, they get trapped. And this is part of that transition where guys will go over to government contracting. I see a lot of guys that are kind of trapped in what I call government contracting purgatory. It's not heaven, it's not hell. You're just there. And I can be the first guy to tell you that I was definitely trapped in purgatory. I don't know what your, I don't know what your take on it, but I would love to hear kind of what you felt about, because we get this question a lot, Mike, where it's like, would you suggest contracting to guys that, get out of the military, and would you suggest it as something to help with the transition?
Yeah, I think honestly, contracting is what set me up for success for a reasonable transition. And what I mean by that is, just like when you go into the military, you don't kind of ease into the military. It's just you go to basic AIT and you're immersed in it. But when you get to the tail end of your career, it's the same thing. They basically release you. You drive away in your rear view mirror. You look at post and you're like, damn, that's it. Now what? And so if I didn't have government contracting handle. I mean, government contracting for me was the transition. And, I had the luxury of still being a part-timer in the National Guard in special operations. But for me, the capital, the camaraderie, the part-timing of contracting work all set me up for success. So I definitely recommend, especially for senior guys who are getting out, that they may want to look at something as an independent or industrial contractor, because if you put yourself in a situation to do like a GS job or something that's a government position, you're never coming out of that. And it's like, I'll see you in 20 years.
Right.
And you already did your 20 years. So it's like, see you in 40 years. So it's definitely something I recommend.
Yeah, and I would definitely, I would second that, which is, I saw so many guys in the, 9 years that I was doing that, which seems like a lifetime ago now. But I saw so many guys that would come in and go out. It was like a revolving door. And I saw a ton of, great ideas, really good entrepreneurs. And I also saw a lot of guys make the same mistakes over and over again, which is if they were using that bridge of contracting in order to transition, they had to start writing their mission statement and commit to to leaving contracting altogether. From my perspective, like if you try to do this like 1 foot in, 1 foot out purgatory, half in, half out as far as contracting and standing up your own business without pulling the plug and just committing, you drag it out. And I see just a lot of guys continue to take that step back into the contracting world and never fully commit to their business. What's your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the biggest thing is, people are fearful of change, and believe it or not, for the civilians or for the, military who don't understand this concept, a lot of vets, we kind of call it like, we're unconventional or irregular and we're comfortable with chaos. But the reality is the military is structured and the military is comfort. And so getting out into the civilian world is scary for most senior leaders or most veterans, period. And so getting a taste of that, and it's hard for people to make that actual transition where they make the commitment. And, like for me, it was the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. I mean, for me to say I'm resigning from the National Guard, which means there is no potential. I'm in the inactive ready reserve now. I'm hanging up the contractor hat, which means that I won't feel relevant in operations, which is something that I always wanted to be a part of my life, is definitely a change. But once you make that commitment, which I've made, it's like committing to the military or a spouse in the first place. You just go all in, and then you deal with it.
Yeah, and I would second that, which is, it's really, I went through a lot of like really, I should say scary times, moving out of the role that I was in and into business, where I just kept reminding myself, I've been through worse. If somebody else in a civilian capacity that has like 1/100th or 1/1000th of my experience and dedication, if they can make it work, I should be able to make it work. And I had to just kind of flush away the fear and continue to push forward. But that was a daily thing. I mean, for me, I don't know about you, but it was daily. Like it wasn't like I'd have to check in every month. It was like daily, just trying to figure it out and remind myself that there is no going back. I've just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, I use the same. It's kind of like the same analogy where when we were Joes or just Army guys and we wanted to be Green Berets, we like looked at guys who are special operations guys and go, damn, those dudes are like legacy. Those guys are like movie stars to us, and we looked up to those guys. And then at some point we made a commitment to saying, hey, we could be like those guys, and then we became those guys. So it's the same premise,
Right.
Whatever the analogy is for you, where you transition and then you make the commitment to business. You look at these guys who are business. I mean, watch Shark Tank, for example. You watch Shark Tank and you're like, damn, these some of these dudes are goobers and they're making millions of dollars off of concepts that they're turning into reality. It's like, if they could do it, there's no way that I can't do it.
Right. So when you're moving in and moving away from contracting and you're starting your company, what's the genesis story of the company that you have now? Tell us about that.
I was contracting. I was in Pakistan, and I was in a Connex, and you're familiar with this.
Yeah.
So I'm in this shithole or crap hole, and I'm like, dude, I don't know if I could do this forever, because this really, it's cool when it's cool, but it's not when it's not. And I'm like, there's got to be a better light at the end of this tunnel. And so I started entertaining the idea. I actually had a counterpart that was my partner, my ride-along partner, and we started brainstorming. And, looking at the industry as a whole, most SF guys, we don't have a whole lot of, no matter what if you're in special operations and you go to get out, you could be a cop, you could be a security guard, you could be a consultant. I mean, those are the standards. But I wanted to do something completely different. And I noticed that survival was a genre that really wasn't oversaturated and occupied with special operations guys. And so I wanted to segregate myself from the tactical industry and just do something a little bit different. So I decided that was the genre I was going to stick with. Started doing logo, legal Zoom, all the stuff on the backside, and taking advantage of my time overseas. And then when I got home, I just committed to it completely.
Well, it was a smart move, because it really is one of the only subsets of kind of the firearm gun community that really has true crossover to a different audience other than the military. The survival market. I mean, it has a lot of people that aren't necessarily gun people.
Right.
So like you said, looking at the market space and identifying something that was unsaturated.
Yeah, and you obviously Jeff, my business partner, with Ready Man. We were doing Ready Man for a while too, and we looked at that market because that's where we were transitioning our skills, right? And to be honest with you, it was never really my thing. Like I was still roasting coffee. I had Black Rifle coffee on the side, and that was just never. My heart really wasn't into it. Whereas like I wanted to roast coffee. That's what I wanted to do. And, being with Matt and JT and those guys, it was one of those things where it made it pretty easy just to commit fully to coffee. I like funny videos. I like roasting coffee. Like, hey, this is a match made in heaven, But I can really respect what you've done with the brand in such a short amount of time. When I first saw that you were doing it, I was stoked because I was like, that's awesome. I always think about it, like guys transitioning out of contracting or the mill, and they're starting to do things differently in a way that's, it is pushing into the civilian market. But really, when you start your own business, you're free. And if you just continue to push forward, obviously those chains are self-induced sometimes, but you're free. You own your own success or failure. And there's truly nothing better than being able to wake up in the morning and go, I own my own destiny. So I was stoked to see, when you started the company, and I started to see you a little bit more on Instagram, and I think we talked a little bit. So tell me kind of your struggles initially. Tell me the big obstacles that you faced that you ran into, that were the walls that you either had to go through, over, and around.
Like something just to bring up is, I thought to myself, if I'm on a flat range in 5-10 years teaching pistol marksmanship, I've taken the wrong course of action.
Right.
Because, and nothing against tacticians who are teaching that, but I thought to myself, it's like, that's what I've been doing my entire life. And so I wanted something completely different. And I have so many more interests, that are along the lines of genre, which is very broad. And so one challenge for me in the beginning was trying to re-educate the client or the customer base on what survival was to me. Survival to me isn't bushcraft survival, rubbing sticks in the woods and hoping for fire. My outlook on it was, hey, modern survival was all the things that I was taught in special operations through military and private schooling and training, and then applying those schools overseas in combat environments and learning those lessons learned, giving those to like the civilian populace. My mission statement was, if I could take a civilian in the middle of, urban San Francisco who has he doesn't want to touch a weapon, to do anything with tactics or anything, if I can convince him to come out of his apartment and learn modern survival, then it was a success. So there was a re-education process that takes place all the time. I spend most of my time developing content, speaking about what modern survival is, which is, typically man-made catastrophes that we're facing today, like active shooters, et cetera. So there was a re-education process. On top of that, because I wanted to come out multifaceted, the podcast, the manufacturing process, there were all their own challenges in the birth of those, because, just like you, I didn't have, I wasn't handed a silver spoon. I didn't grow up in a business family. I had to start from scratch. I spent most of my time contracting overseas, reading books, and saturating myself in e-commerce based business. So there's a whole bunch of learning curves and processes where I was, I still learned every single day. I mean, I learn things daily on what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, and have a real critical mindset in how I approach my business. I'm very self-aware, but I'm also very critical of what I'm doing. And if I'm doing something wrong, I won't just continue to have a false sense of security. I'll stop and I'll shift fire and execute.
No, that's solid. And so when you butt up against some of those direct obstacles, like, what do you turn into? Like, do you have assets that you're turning to that you would recommend to other veteran entrepreneurs out there? Books that you've read, websites that you've utilized. What's your go-to as far as information outside of Google, of course?
I think there's a whole bunch of good books that I've read, Outliers being one of them. There's tons of good books that I've read that deal with mindset.
Right.
With Winning in Mind, for example, was a book about mindset specifically for performance athletes. Now that mindset, just like in survival for me, it's kind of like the umbrella that shields all the other capabilities and skill sets that you have. As long as you have the mindset, whatever you learn underneath that will be shielded because you have the resiliency. And so I think critically speaking, as far as sources, I surrounded myself with a whole bunch of entrepreneurs that were successful in their own genres. For example, a buddy of mine named Will Harbin, he runs Kickseye, which is a video game company in Silicon Valley. Now, his space is completely different than mine, but he is my go-to consultant because he's a buddy of mine to resource information on marketing, on strategy, on things that I might be doing right and doing wrong. I don't know off the top of my head, Evan, the books that I read on marketing, but I basically did an Amazon, Kindle search for marketing and read the top 10 books in marketing when it came to e-commerce based business. I've read the TED Talks public speaking book because when 6 months into my business, I was approached by Oracle to speak at their sales and marketing training before 350 people. Wow. I'm a Green Beret Sergeant Major who talks to a company full of dudes, and now I'm talking to 350 millennials who are interested in starting a business or starting their careers with Oracle. So there was a whole bunch of things that I had to kind of like take the cliff notes and change. I wasn't reading FMs anymore. The Ranger Handbook had to be set aside, and I had to change the dynamic. But the same principles apply.
Yeah, and I would absolutely recommend, because I've done similar things where I'll read one marketing book or two, or I've read probably 20 marketing books in the last year, and that, if that one's suggested, or if it's good, I'll go back into the suggested other books that other readers have read, and then I'll literally take the cliff notes. There's a couple different websites that do summaries on those, and I'll just read those, or audiobooks and podcasts. Outside of your own podcast, are you listening to any podcasts that help you with business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite podcasts, Tim Ferriss, who's an author of the 4-Hour Work Week, the 4-Hour Body, and now the Tools of Titans. I'm pretty religious about listening to Tim Ferriss, because he's taking, the subject matter experts in the particular field that might not even, a lot of entrepreneurs, especially starting out, specifically want to research people in their own field. And what I've found is that, listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast, that people who are completely irrelevant to my market, to my genre, they are completely relevant to what I'm doing, because they have some kind of strategy, some kind of mindset that helps me in the long run.
Yeah, I listen to that religiously too. I listen to Tim Ferriss. I actually listen to Joe Rogan's podcast a lot too. I need to, and I'll be the first guy to admit to you, like I do need to listen to more podcasts, but it's just a matter of like finding the time in my day to try to like listen to something other than. I mean, some of these are 2 to 3 hours long, but the Cliff Notes thing, that's really helped a lot, actually. Like being able to put things in a summary, and executive summary, basically, and I'll flip through that. The next question I have is there something in your military career, like a course, call it like BNOC or ANOC or the Sergeant Major's Academy, whatever it might be, that you reference a lot in your career, where you're like, I'm really happy I went to this course because it actually taught me a lot about business?
Yeah, I think, ANOC for us, E7 school for us, Sergeant First Class School, was a short experience, especially in special operations.
Right.
But I think the most impactful course for me it's PLDC, or what's called the Warrior Leader course now,
right,
which is E5 school or sergeant school. The transition from being a lower enlisted guy into being an E5. I was a sergeant at 20 years old, and I remember going to that course, and where I was put in situations where I went to Fort Knox, where I was 11 Bravo, but I was co-located with 19 Deltas, which were Cav Scouts, but also females. And I remember, being in the infantry obviously is easy when you're dealing with nothing but males, but when you introduce females, it takes a special type of leadership, especially in the military, for people to adapt to that, for people who aren't used to that. And so for me, it changed my thinking on how I was to become a leader, or how I was going to become a manager. And I started learning things like patience, and how to task organize properly, and how to disseminate information properly. All these, I think, foundational aspects of leadership that are critical into having a successful business. Business wise, I don't think there's any one school that stands out. But the leadership schools, being E5 school, E6 or E7 school, they all help me. The Q course, for example, and this, the qualification course, being surrounded in a market of like-minded individuals, and then seeing what it's like to be, put in charge over senior leaders that are, I was a E5 at the time, but there was E6s and E7s, where you have to step up to the plate. And it's kind of like Ranger School, where, when in charge, be in charge.
Right.
I learned a lot about business leadership in those schools, for sure.
Yeah, I would second that too. I've thought a lot about that over the last couple of years. The thing that I always use I keep referencing, I like to ask that question to people, because I keep referencing, team dynamics in conjunction with
That's
mission.
what I was just going to go on. Like one of the big things the Air Force NCO school harps on is the team dynamic thing. And it's like in the business world, if you've never heard that before, you're never going to know kind of the cycle that a new team goes through. And it could cause you to make poor decisions in the beginning because you'd just be ejecting people left and right, not knowing, hey, the storming phase is normal. It's normal. It's healthy. Get through it and move into the next phase. So it's having those courses under our belt, I think greatly puts us at an advantage. Just in the leadership aspect.
I
Absolutely.
I mean, that's like, leadership and management. We talk about more, I think I've talked more about leadership and management in my 20 years than most guys would ever have in their business career. And, being part of a team, understanding mission, understanding what your metal tasks are. Like those are always the things I'm like, well, what do we need to accomplish this mission? It looks great on a board, but how do we structure and prioritize the way that we move this forward? And I would say by far, like understanding and being able to implement a plan, like go through a planning cycle, being able to, brief a plan and then implement it. That's all I'm doing. I mean, the funny thing is, like, that's all I'm doing, man. I wrote a 5-paragraph op order for this. Like, people don't believe me sometimes. Like, no, I wrote a 5-paragraph op order for my first business, which turned into, I did a Frago and changed it over to Black Rifle Coffee, and I continue to modify. The mission is always the same. People are always like, what's the mission? Like, well, Black Rifle Coffee has a mission. Evan has a mission for himself and his family. And those are synergistic and they complement one another. But I still think, having a mission as an entrepreneur, it's acutely important. Understanding how to task and prioritize those elements to accomplish it, that becomes number 2. And the military gave me all the skills for that. Like I can't attribute any of those to the civilian career.
Yeah, I think the acronym MD&P, military decision-making process, where we go into seclusion and, isolate ourselves and do this whole entire planning purpose and structure. What's crazy, and I've realized in working with large corporations that at the tactical level, at the management and soldier level of these companies, they don't have that. I remember walking into like a huge corporation, and I was doing some consulting for them, and I walked upstairs and I was in their office space, and they were like, hey, Mike, what do you think about what's going on? And I said, hey, what's the incentive for the employees in the sales on the sales floor? What's their incentive? And he showed me a board, and it was a piece of construction paper. It was like an 8x10 piece of construction paper, and it had gold. It had people's names lined out, and it had gold stars off to the right side. And so the person with the most gold stars at the end of the week got some incentive. And I'm like, you guys are operating at the kindergarten level. Like you guys are a $100 million company, and you guys are using 8x10 construction paper. I was like, if you want to incentivize this process, have these guys on the big screen, get a little horse graphics and make it like a horse race, so everybody sees what everybody's doing every single minute when they can look up at the screen. So it pushes them to excel by minute, not by day. And so they only see the construction paper when they're walking out or walking into work. Right. And they were like mind blown. And I'm like, hey,
I just came up with that right now.
Coordinate. Yeah, I was like, color coordinate your badges to make teams, because you guys operate in cells in 6 different teams. Color coordinate it, make shirts and branding for each team. So there's this incentive and this team esprit de corps that they could operate in, and that drives momentum. And they're like, what? Colored lanyards? And they're like, it is mind blowing. I'm like, dude, this is what I would have did day one with a bunch of privates in any military unit
who could dig faster
to develop their mindset. Yeah, it's crazy, man. It's crazy.
You know what? I'm going to use some of that. I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to steal some of that. I'm going to go to the office tomorrow and literally print, because we have our own print shop, and print different shirts for sales, coffee.
Yeah, that is a really good idea.
I'm fucking using it, dude. I'm telling you, I'm stealing it right now. So see, that's.
So let's move into now what you got cooking up in the future.
Yeah, dude. Tell us more about Fieldcraft. Tell us like the mission statement. Tell us what you got going on, your courses, kind of all the aspects of your business now.
Oh man, it's exciting. I'm super excited to even go here. But our mission statement is to instill mindset, equipment and training into civilians so they're better prepared to defend themselves and their families. And what we've done is, we've evolved into where we've committed ourselves to creating this whole tribe concept, where I've seen, in business, right, you're trying to fix the problem. And I think a societal problem is the fact that we don't have a good sense of belonging anymore. People want, especially, it's not just vets, civilians, what I've realized more than ever, want to belong to something. They want to be and feel part of something. And so there's all these subcultures that are being developed. And I want to be the subculture that pushes this kind of positive phenomenon, which is, hey, if you're in the tribe, you're like-minded because you believe in the values that are instilled, which are kind of the same values and principles that we had in the Army. We carried on keychains on our dog tags, which is, loyalty, duty, honor, selfless service, respect, all this good stuff. But also for these people to be comfortable with being prepared and not being scared or intimidated by a bunch of SF guys who are talking about guns and talking about go bags and everyday carry, etc. So we have that one sliver of the business. We have media and content. I just got picked up actually last week by 5 publishing or 5 magazines owned by one publisher, which includes Ballistic Magazine, Sniper Mag, a whole bunch of other guys, where I'm going to be a contributor, which obviously leads to content and influence. But something that I'm really excited about is, and I can't go into detail about this, but we actually did sign a contract with a large network that starts with a D. It starts with a
nice,
D.
Nice.
It could be anything, but it's in the realm of like history, and then we're doing a show to integrate survival and the integration of technology into survival, kind of like Mythbusters for the survival genre. So we're excited about that project. I want to migrate my business to where I'm doing more content development. I'm doing more podcasts,
right.
And then I'm paying these young, impressionable, squared away gunfighters that come out of the military, who kind of like the contract thing we talked about, where they're transitioning. We just picked up a pararescue, former active pararescue guy who's now our medic, who's teaching TCCC for the company, where I create kind of like this pool of a whole bunch of tacticians that have relevant, recent experience in the global war on terror that could teach these civilians. And then I'm going to migrate out of that slot and kind of let the brand carry itself.
Man, that is a lot, dude. I mean, it sounds awesome. I follow you on Instagram. I see you're everywhere. How many courses are you putting on per year?
Typically we run in on average around 4 to 6 a month.
Okay.
Which puts us around. Last year, I think we did 30 plus courses.
Wow.
And, everything from gunfighter, carbine, pistol, TCCC, off-road survival.
Right.
The biggest criticism I get from a lot of people in business and the industry is that we're kind of oversaturating ourselves or overstretching ourselves across a lot of broad spectrums. And my whole thing is, if I could be an active duty Green Beret, jack of all trades that has to do every single thing, then I could manage to do 5 to 7 things well in the civilian sector, and I'm not overwhelmed, so I'm okay. I think it just people get the impression they're like, Dan, you're doing a lot. You need to narrow your focus. Well, survival is a large genre, and I'm not afraid of that broad stroke.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think that, the longer the days and the more committed you are to your priorities of work, you have to continue to push. You have to continue to take on more, and then you'll eventually find, okay, well, I've taken on too much, and then you can back off. But until you find that breaking point, you got to keep going.
Yeah.
How many? So when
sure.
when you do a course, are you doing them primarily in Colorado, or are you doing them all around the United States?
We've kind of isolated our focus on the West Coast between Cali, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, and Texas.
Okay.
Primarily because, I'm not a big fan of the East Coast. And,
right.
Now that I'm in the West Coast, I'm primarily holding those courses there.
Okay. And where do they find you on, where's your website, IG, and Facebook?
So, anybody who's looking for information on upcoming courses can go to fieldcraftsurvival.com. Also, our Instagram handles are, mine's Soft Survivor, SOF Survivor, and at Fieldcraft Survival. One of my employees who's a former teammate is Kurt_Team Fieldcraft.
Nice.
And we have a whole bunch of brand ambassadors that you're probably seeing on Instagram. But we also have the podcast on iTunes and on SoundCloud. It's at Fieldcraft Survival.
Okay. Awesome.
No, that's great, man. It's been awesome to have you on the show. We went about 6 minutes over, but I want to stick to our timeline the best that we can. We'd love to have you back just to get updates on, about every year or so. We've had a few guys on there. Outside of you, obviously, and you guys, like, I'll say this, like, he is absolutely phenomenal instructor. I've worked around him for several weeks in a very close environment. Fantastic instructor. The dude can wield his tools with a significant amount of expertise. So you would never waste $1 going to one of his courses. Outside of you, who would you go to if somebody can't get into your class?
Honestly, I recommend Northern Red if people are looking for tactics. I also recommend a buddy of mine named Kevin Falk in Florida, who does Devil Dog Consulting for anything medical. Those are my go-tos. If you had a tactical company, Black Rifle Tactical Company, I'd recommend you.
I appreciate that. I'll second that on Northern Red. Tom Spooner, Paul Tobias is out there. JD Patensky, those guys are just fucking top notch. Is it Potnitsky?
Yeah.
I keep fucking it up. Top notch. Well, dude, thanks a lot for being on the show, man. We're 7 minutes over. Well, we'd love to have you back. Everybody go check out Mike Fieldcraft Survival, and keep him posted on what you got going on out there. So hashtag your stuff when you get it from him, and definitely sign up for a course.
Yep. Thanks, guys, for having me on. And I just want to say thank you for what you're doing, Evan, and thank you for supporting the veterans, and keep doing what you're doing. Thanks.
I appreciate it, Mike.
Black Rifle Coffee Company, along with Arson Wave, would like to thank you for tuning in to Black Hearted. Have a great fucking day.